Okay, Dr. Gant, we are live streaming and recording.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Monica Gant. I'm the Associate Secretary of the Academic Support Team for the Delaware Department of Education. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our fifth and final Delaware COVID-19 Academics and Equity Working Group meeting. This July 1st, 2020 meeting is being called to order at 5:00 p.m. This meeting is being held electronically. On March 12, 2020, Governor Carney issued a declaration of a state of emergency for the state of Delaware due to a public health threat. The state of emergency allows all public meetings of executive branch public bodies, including the Delaware COVID-19 Education Working Group meetings, to be conducted electronically, either by means of telephone conference call or video conference call. The information regarding this meeting, including information on how to access the meeting electronically, was published on June 22nd, 2020, and posted on the state public meeting calendar site. The presentation slides are also posted. Individuals may participate in this meeting via the DDOE YouTube channel publicized on the agenda. And there is one of our participants that has not yet muted. If you could make sure your microphones are muted. Thank you. Each week, public comment is compiled from the previous week and posted online. A copy is also provided to the workgroup chairs to then share overall themes and related to responses that may impact the work at hand. We encourage working group members to review these comments online before each meeting. In this week's public comments, the majority of comments advocate for either opening or not opening schools. The Governor's Advisory Council for Exceptional Citizens raised concerns about our recommendations addressing the needs of our most vulnerable students, which includes meeting the needs of our special education students. And Emily Klein provided useful suggestions reflected in today's presentation for revised language when conducting an analysis of multiple data points after assessing students with disabilities. You'll notice some of those changes that are a little bit different than what you received by email. Those will be highlighted in yellow, and we'll point those out this evening. Karen Ellen, on behalf of the Rodell Teacher Network, posted priority recommendations in the following categories: technology infrastructure, social emotional learning supports, innovative differentiated educator roles, mastery or competency-based learning, support and outreach to all students, especially high-need students, personalized teacher supports and training, and educator involvement. As a reminder, our workgroup meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have voice, public comment was accepted via email and voicemail. All comments and ideas were forwarded to the respective workgroups and posted on Delaware Department of Education's website as well at www.doe.k12.de/PAGE/4211. Those public comments will close as of Friday, July 3rd. Our meeting structure will begin with an opening, which will include a summary of public comments, parking lot, purpose, goal, and agreements, a review of essential actions draft by scenario, and concluding with next steps. Our norm for engaging in our online meeting is that we begin with muted microphones and, if possible, video camera on so that we can visually confirm clarity and sound. Our schedule of work led to tonight's recommendations to the Secretary of Education through the lens of educational equity within 3 public health scenarios. We used our first 3 work sessions to gain common understanding of equity, assessment, and instruction, and identified key considerations in a minimal spread, minimal to moderate spread, and significant spread scenario. We used last week's meeting to capture our notice and wonders about the essential actions which emerged from our key considerations. We will use our final meeting to review final recommendations based on that feedback. I'd now like to give each workgroup committee member the opportunity to introduce themselves and their role. Kevin Lamb, our technology host, will now call members by name to introduce themselves. Please remain muted to control feedback until your name is called.
All right. Ms. Castellanos, I've taken you off mute.
Thank you. My name is Allison Castellanos. I am an English as a second language teacher at Delaware Technical Community College. I'm representing English language learners, families, and teachers, and I live in Georgetown, Delaware.
Senator Pettyjohn, I've taken you off mute.
Thank you. Senator Brian Pettyjohn, 19th District in Georgetown.
Okay, I don't think Representative Shoup is on. Ms. Thomas, you are off mute.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Thomas. I'm the Delaware Educators Rising president, and I am a junior at Smyrna High School.
And Cricket, I've taken you off mute.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Cricket Hines, and I'm an education consultant for Opportunity Labs.
Mr. Young, you are off mute.
I'm with the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. Thankful to be here this evening.
Okay, Ms. Har, you are off mute.
I'm Gwendolyn Har. I teach English language arts at Dover High School. I guess representative for our high school perspective.
Representative Williams, you're off mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Williams. I'm the state rep from the 19th District and vice chair of the House Education Committee. Thank you.
And Ms. Schneider, I've taken you off mute.
Schneider, principal representative, and I am the Seaford School District.
Dr. Lawson, we're ready for you.
Good evening, Lisa Lawson. I serve as the Executive Director for Special Education and Student Supports in the Brandywine School District.
Ms. Gregg, you've been unmuted.
Hi, Loretta Gregg, parent representative from the Lake Forest School District.
Okay, Dr. Alonso.
Thank you. Dr. Maria Alonso, board president at La Academia Antonio Alonso Charter School.
Okay, and I don't think I see Dr. Burrows on. Ms. Vitelli, you're up.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Vitelli, and I'm a special education teacher at the Colonial Early Education Program in Newcastle, Delaware, and I'm the 2020 Delaware.
Ms. Ingram, I've taken you off mute.
Good evening, I'm Stephanie Ingram. I'm a fourth grade teacher, and I'm also the president of the Delaware State Education Association.
And Senator Luckman, I've taken you off mute.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm state senator for Delaware's 3rd District, which is the city of Wilmington. I am vice chair of the Senate Education Committee and a co-chair of the Reading Consortium for Educational Equity, and mom of a rising senior.
Thank you so much. This is an incredible team. We have done incredible work, and I'm really excited about what we're going to present moving forward. We have been able to work in our virtual work group meetings over the past 4 weeks by honoring our work group agreements to engage fully, remain focused on our goal, be mindful of other members, solutions focused, and assume good intentions. As a result, we are positioned to fulfill our charge to provide our recommendations to the Secretary of Education. Our recommendations, once again, will not be used to determine whether school buildings are open or closed, nor will we create requirements for remote learning. Through our common understanding that we have developed through each meeting, our recommendations will serve as guidance for what districts and charter schools should consider for equity, assessment, and instruction when we start school, either in person, remotely, or in combination of both that we often refer to as hybrid. This feedback informed our final recommendations, which Secretary of Education will use in combination with recommendations from the other 2 working groups to support the development of Delaware's reopening schools guidance. I'm going to scroll down. Okay. So last week we captured items in our parking lot that inform revision of essential actions into the final recommendations. How districts and charters will implement recommendations is actually work that is occurring across the state as we develop this guidance. So there was quite a bit in the parking lot around the how part, how this is actually going to be implemented. And there are teams of folks around in districts and charters that are working on that as we speak. There was some additional information in the parking lot or suggestions in the parking lot that we captured. One was the review of seat time that Dr. Burrows talked about, that's something that probably would fall under regulations, which I know services and operations are looking at, as well as professional development time and what is in code. To prepare us for our review of our recommendations document, let's review the common understanding to provide context one final time. So we know that educational equity is our goal. We understand that assessment is the ongoing process of gathering information about student learning to inform education-related decisions. Instead of learning loss, which focuses on student deficits, we viewed unfinished learning as the prerequisite knowledge or skills that students need for future work that they don't have yet. So our action will be to provide consistent access to grade level content, because students experiencing unfinished learning benefit most from on-grade level instruction. So equity plus assessment plus instruction equals accelerated student learning and grade level curriculum using prioritized assessment that directly informs instruction. So I'd now like to ask our co-chair, Mr. Ashley Giska, to use to review our final recommendations in each of our scenarios, highlighting those areas that we did make adjustments to based on the feedback that we received from this committee last week. So Mr. Giska.
Thank you, Dr. Gant. Just wanted to say thank you to everybody again for all the outstanding work, dialogue, effort, and thought that you've put into all of this. As we go through this, I do want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due. I know that Dr. Gant and Cricket from Opportunity Labs spent a tremendous amount of time pouring through your recommendations from last week and making sure that every idea and thought that you brought forward is represented in our final recommendations in their appropriate places. So I really appreciate the work that the team has done on this, and to Cricket and Dr. Gant. And without further ado, let's take a look at the final recommendations we'll be presenting to the Secretary of Education. So under minimal spread, in person or before the school building opens, one of the things that we wanted to draw attention to was the researching need for additional programming that supports students in unfinished learning, best practices for remote and blended learning, and other charters and districts from across the country. So the idea of looking at what is happening and what is working and doing more of that and bringing those things together was important. It was pointed out last week. And it's been included now in our planning process. You'll notice we struck through the language that was a little bit confusing around assigning non-teaching staff to support SEL and things of that nature. But we've opened that up a bit more to how we're going to research additional programming and supporting students through that method, as opposed to sort of putting ourselves in a corner with the original language from D. So that was represented very well. And I appreciate that. I'll give you a moment to review this final recommendation. Okay. The next one we move on to, one of the things that I believe Ms. Ingram pointed out was the need to address teachers specifically as educator, because many people in our districts and buildings are engaged in the instructional and planning process that are not what we would be sort of just classifying as a teacher. So we replaced that word with educator. And I think that comes through well. We also wanted to be careful to make sure, oftentimes we speak in acronyms, but we wanted to spell out the word social emotional learning, so that was clear as a focus in our plan. And as we go through the rest of the recommendations this evening, the need, and I think that was very clear in much of our dialogue last week, to focus on social emotional learning and have that be a large part of our instructional vision for the year we're going to have. So we made sure that we spelled that out in the beginning here. It will be abbreviated as we move on through the document, but we wanted to spell that out and honor some of the feedback last week, as well as the change and shift to educator. Go ahead and take a moment to review. All right.
Can I also point out that educator was changed throughout the entire document, anytime there was an acronym, the first time the acronym was introduced, we spelled it out, and then throughout the rest of the document, you'll see that the acronym will be in place. The other thing that's different is that everything now is categorized under headings. And so we were in the planning heading initially, and now we're in the instruction heading moving forward.
Very good. Very good. Continuing on in the instruction heading, one of the things that was also brought forward was the idea around, there were CTE teachers and teachers in very specific areas that needed to be included in this thinking. So I think the way we went about it, instead of trying to get into the weeds with all that, the sentence under D was establish the overarching structure and plan for the first unit of instruction for each grade level and content area, sort of encompassing all those different instructional endeavors that different teachers do, especially as we move into secondary level. There's lots of content area teachers that we need to make sure districts are developing plans around and structure for. So we used that language specifically there. That was some great feedback. Also, again, this theme of making sure that SEL is at the forefront for how we implement instruction during this time. We added G, which is going to be located at the bottom of the page in red, support the integration of SEL instruction with an emphasis on strengthening connections with students and implementing practices for culturally responsive teaching. This is an important sentence. It's an important consideration or recommendation. One of the conversations we had earlier in the day is that in our particular work group, there's been so much happening across our society in addition to COVID that it's very important that we bring forward all this equity work, and it's a very great opportunity for us to do that. So support the integration of SEL into instruction with an emphasis on strengthening connections with students and implementing practices for culturally responsive teaching. And then, of course, also the idea of leveraging collective staff support was included as well based on feedback from last week. And that would include the non-teaching staff and support SEL staff. Take a second to go ahead and review that. And again, Dr. Gann, if there's anything you wanted to share as well, please jump in.
No, I just want to credit the committee. You all really raised the importance of SEL as integrated in instruction, not just an isolated piece that occurs that is actually in addition to what teachers would be teaching, but the way in which teachers teach and the way in which they do their craft and practice. And so I thought that was brilliant. And to be able to integrate that was fabulous.
Fantastic. All right, let's go ahead. In person before schooling, we're going to be moving to a new assessment or a new subsection called assessment or heading, if you will, assessment. Here, if we look down to segment C, identify appropriate screening processes and diagnostics. One of the feedback was to determine a process for new transitioning of students, including those entering pre-K and kindergarten. We had a lot of conversation around this last week. And I think a lot of people brought some really important points to the table about there's going to be very challenging situations around transitioning students between districts. There's going to be a lot of movement. Also, students coming into school, setting for the first time, what that's going to be like and what we need to do. And I think it was Dr. Burrows. I don't know if he's with us tonight, but I'll credit him for sure. Really just putting a point on it saying we needed to bring a new process in there. So that's what this additional recommendation or this addition is about, is establishing a process for transitioning students and students that are going to be entering the school setting for the first time in this very challenging year. So I think that's a very important thing for districts to engage in, and it's represented here under C. All right, take a second to review. Senator Lockman, I see you noted something on 1D. Did I miss something to review or not? I was just looking at the chat.
No, we caught a typo.
Oh, very important work.
Stephanie understood it. It wasn't me.
Yes.
We got it. Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, let's move on. Is this, no, okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Very good. Continuing on with our assessment heading. One of the things that we integrated from last week's conversation was to develop a plan to assess each child when he or she returns to school. The plan should include timelines for data analysis and a schedule to reconvene each individualized education plan IEP team to review each student's IEP plan and identify the student's progress and or needs, et cetera, as we move on. One of the things that came up quite a bit last week, and I know Rebecca's brought this to the forefront quite a lot, and some other folks, is the need to really have clear structures and great attention paid to students who do have IEPs. There were some challenges that emerged, obviously in sort of the hecticness as this year closed out, on making sure our IEP process was up to date. And there have been a lot of people working very hard on this. You'll see later as we move through the document, even down below where the yellow highlight is, that the Office of Exceptional Children and folks with Dr. Gant's team, they put their eyes on this and provided some additional language change so that it really made sure we were compliant with all of the laws and regulations around that particular thing, but also made sure that we had the best possible process recommendations in place for our students who have IEPs and for our teachers who are engaging in that very, very important work. Also, as E, you'll see we added to develop a robust virtual learning plan that can be implemented with students who are medically vulnerable and should not attend school per physician recommendations. I'll let Dr. Gant touch on this, but this was a crossover from the health and wellness group that got shifted into our considerations. Dr. Gant, do you want to make any mention about that process, shifting medically vulnerable students over to us?
Sure. So in the Health and Wellness Committee, they have a category that they were actually addressing supports for medically fragile students. It really focused on kind of the health and wellness aspect, but there was one bullet about robust virtual learning plans and instruction. And they really didn't feel as though instruction should be in the Health and Wellness Committee. And so that was transferred over to us, and we pulled that information in and just plugged it into our document. And so that's why that hasn't been there all along, but it showed up this week because it was actually in the Health and Wellness document all along. It was just in the wrong group, in the wrong work group.
Yeah, and that of course makes a lot of sense. I think, you know, one of the things that if you've had a chance to watch any of the other sessions for the different groups, there's so many places where we intersect, but this is one that naturally had to move over to our recommendations, and I think was worked out quite well. So thank you, Dr. Gant. And then of course at the bottom here under the new heading of professional learning, which is something that's come forward as a real focus. We took out the word virtual structures just to put in parentheses there, professional learning communities as one possible structure in which the collaboration and reflection would take place in. So the way that's set up is it's flexible for districts and charters and private schools that have different systems in place, but it also covers the common system of professional learning communities. So that change is in there as well. Go ahead and take a second and review any further changes on this page.
Mr. Giska, it's Kevin. We have a hand up.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, Kevin, please let me know if anybody wants to chime in as we're marching through our final recommendations. Kevin, who do we have right now?
Representative Williams, I've taken you off mute.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Williams.
Thank you. So 4D, do you think that we should also put 504 plans in there?
Well, I tell you the reason that we didn't put 504s there is because the IEPs are federal law. It's something that has to be, it's a federal document, it's a legal document. 504 plans are documents that are developed by districts to provide support, additional support, and you will see 504s through the rest of the document, but we didn't link it specifically here because this is speaking specifically to IEPs. So thank you for bringing 504s up. I meant to mention that a little earlier as well. It does appear in the document, it just doesn't appear here because we're speaking specifically about IEPs.
I know it was, I've seen it throughout the document. I just didn't know if we needed to identify it there as well. And I have one more question about assessment. I had brought this up probably 2 weeks ago. And I know we talked about it and said put it on a parking lot. What are we going to do, or where can we put something like this as far as removing the state assessment asking for a waiver?
So the state assessment right now it's a federal requirement. It's not something that we can waive. The reason it was waived this year is because the federal government waived it. We've gotten no feedback or direction on what they're interested in doing for this year because we haven't started school yet. So we're going to follow OSEP guidance, and once they give us direction, then we will follow that.
Right, because I do see other states are asking for a waiver for the upcoming school year. Is that something that we as a group can say if the waiver is offered that we should take it? Or, I mean, I would like it noted somewhere that we had discussion around the state assessment because, you know, as we know, we don't want teachers coming back and admin coming back focusing on a state assessment. They'll have enough to do with the kids and catching them up. So I would like somewhere in the report to state that we talked about the state assessment and that if there is a waiver that is allowed, that we would consider it or at least get some input from the members of this committee.
So we will absolutely put it in the parking lot. This document really doesn't cover the state assessment because, as you remember, our conversation around assessment was really diagnosis and determining where students are coming in and how we're going to diagnose for unfinished learning. The state assessment in that model was one piece at the very end, and we didn't address that in this conversation because we get direct guidance from the federal government on whether or not we are implementing the state assessment. So if OSEP, if USAID comes back and says, yes, this is an option, then of course the state would make the decision at that point to, like we did this year, to request the waiver. But at this point, that really isn't an option for us because it has not been provided to us by the federal government.
And if I can, Representative Williams, and Dr. Gann, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
Now, Representative Williams, I think one of the things that we did here is, I think, if you asked all the members of the committee, if we did our druthers, when this year comes to pass, would it be better if it was waived? I think there'd be a lot more people that were comfortable with that than would rather us go forward with it. So I don't think you're alone in your thinking. But like Dr. Gant's saying, this isn't something that we can have any influence over right now. So what we tried to do, and if you remember, we broke down assessment into the different types of assessment that, our students engage in throughout the year. And so in order to say things without saying them, I think the focus of our committee was on formative assessment, curriculum-based assessment that is really highly linked to the student's classroom experience and also giving us information about unfinished learning. And, so what is unsaid sometimes matters just as much. We didn't delve in, we didn't even touch those things like state assessments. We didn't even go beyond that because right now what we're saying is the most important thing is for formative assessment, classroom-based assessment, curriculum-linked assessment that can give our teachers accurate information about our students so they can move forward. And sure. I think kind of by us saying that's our focus as a group, that sort of puts out there as well that we're not focused on a state assessment model right now. That's not a place where this particular group's mind was when developing these recommendations. But again, I don't think it goes in the recommendations because it's not something that we have any influence over right now. It's a federal government decision, but certainly something that will be up for discussion as we move forward through the year when the feds determine whether or not that's going to be their path forward, or if they're going to stay the course and keep those assessments in place. So right. I don't know if that satisfies you at all, Representative Williams, but that's just my take on it.
Right, and I appreciate that, but I mean, I feel that this plan has been planned with a lot of help from outside people, but I just want to make sure that, we're here to offer input. Sure. And because it wasn't part of this plan, doesn't mean that some of us don't have concerns about what is going to happen when we open up. And I just want to note it somewhere that, if we do have a chance to have a waiver, that it will be discussed and that there might be other people on here that feel the same way as I do, that we should be focusing on the formative assessments and other things instead of teaching to a test. So I understand that that's not part of this, but I feel very strongly about at least noting somewhere that we had a discussion about this.
Okay.
We will absolutely
Also-
note it. It's been noted in our minutes, but we absolutely will note it.
In the
Yes.
report.
Thank you.
We have a hand up from Ms. Ingram. Ms. Ingram, I'm taking you off mute.
Thank you. I just had a question about assessment 4E, the plans for the students who are medically vulnerable, and I wondered why that wasn't under instruction number 3.
You know, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Thank you.
No,
Lots of great
I'm not
ideas,
saying
Dr.
it like I'm not saying it like I'm surprised. I'm saying that that's really probably the best place for it.
It's funny that you say that, because this idea about you know, instruction being the place for some of those things has already come up today. So it's definitely a duly noted point. I'll leave it to Dr. Gant.
I'm sure Cricket has captured it.
I know. Stephanie, just tell me one more time, under number 3.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Ms. Ingram, was there anything else about that?
No, thank you.
Okay, good point. Excellent point. Okay, let's keep going so we can review some of these considerations that were changed in our final recommendations here. I appreciate the feedback. Again, raise your hand. Kevin's going to keep an eye out for it if there's something you wanted to add as we review these. The heading under professional learning continues. There was a note to add in the restorative supports and social emotional learning and culturally responsive education to support student learning and engagement. So we spelled out social emotional learning that was previously abbreviated, I believe, is the reason for that. You'll notice the change to educators in B. These are some changes that we had done previously, but are carrying over throughout the document and under the new headings. The learning management system platform was added under the language and examples under D for training on adopted technologies. Certainly something that came through last week in our conversation, and you know, has spoke to me a lot, particularly because this is you know, what I do as a daily basis with my team at Laurel, is really trying to figure out ways to make sure that we have our teachers get the best professional development around this technology that they're using so that they can really engage students. And all districts have been engaged in learning management systems, so that has now been added. An excellent point. Take a second to review Hans or Dr. Gant if there's anything else on this particular note.
No.
Okay. All right. Let's carry on. Minimal school spread in person. We're going to move on to a new heading, preparation for remote learning. One of the key elements of our conversation over the last 5 weeks has been the need for always being ready for a remote scenario as things change. So some of the language that was added under 7, you'll say, in case of a return to remote learning, just a language change from what we previously had written there. But again, drawing attention to the need to be ready in the planning process so that if we do have to shift between scenarios, we are ready for remote learning. Ensure, I'm not 100% sure, Dr. Gant, what ensure or why we changed ensure.
It just said make sure, so we were just
make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I figured it was just a language element.
It was.
But okay, and then we struck through across a variety of settings. As we move down in 8, you also see we struck through in case of a return to remote learning, redundant as it was stated previously in this particular heading. So just some minor changes here on this page and some language changes. But of course, the heading itself is quite important. Any other hands or thoughts, or we'll move forward?
Well, we do have a hand. Dr. Alonso, I've taken you off mute.
Dr. Alonso.
Thank you. Just a quick question for the number 7. I know it's kind of implicitly stated, but implications for staffing, or should we put additional staffing? Because that's one of the concerns I have, that there's so much demand being made that we're going to need additional staffing. And I just wondered if being more explicit if would be helpful. Just a question.
Yeah, I do think it was intended to be implied because there's so many different district sizes, schools, charters, et cetera, coming at this. It is going to be on a case-by-case basis. But I know that was a big part of our conversation, Dr. Alonso, last week. Just the the feeling of we're going to need capacity increased in some manner. And what exactly that means may shift between districts and charters and private schools. Dr. Gant, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the reason that it's pretty broad is, and I understand the need for making it clear, but the reason it was broad is because staffing might be a shift in roles. And so, are there role shifts? Are there, additions or subtractions or whatever it would be? I think that was just to leave it broad enough so that districts and charters would be able to operate based on what they need and what's specific to their setting. So that's why it just says staffing versus additional staffing, because it might be a shift in staffing.
Okay.
Just check in with Ms. Ingram here. Ms. Ingram,
I'm so sorry. I forgot to put my hand down.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. No additional hands.
Okay. Do we skip ahead or no?
I moved to the next one.
Okay, we're good. Communication. Okay, so the next heading that was added is the communication heading. Again, a major theme, that came up over the last 5 weeks was the importance of communicating, connecting with families. One of the shifts was just talking about, I can't remember exactly how we had it worded, but the shift to all modes necessary, which is a less little like a last resort and more like we're going to include everyone and do whatever it takes to make that happen. Senator Lockman brought up that last week, so that is in there. And I think it adds a nice touch to the language of number 9. D was added, intervention programs and services, as noted from last week. And then under E, available supports for families such as, segment 3 was added, details around any potential transition to hybrid or remote, including the criteria for transition. That's going to be important information. I think, we had some conversation last week about really thinking through all the things that families are going to need to know, the types of supports they're going to have if they want to be able to engage, and if we can, expect that give and take relationship, and those details around potential transitions and criteria for transitions and things of that nature are going to be really important for districts to develop and put forth for the families and members of their community. So all of that has been included under communication from last week's dialogue. Just take a minute to review. Again, Kevin will let me know if anyone's got a hand up. Okay. So we're going to shift now to our final recommendations around the minimal spread when school buildings open. So let's take a look at when they are open and what our final recommendations are around this. Under instruction, assessment, and professional learning grouped together in this heading, there were a few things that were added. If you start looking through, we added C, utilize assessments needed for reentry, as well as appropriate screening processes and diagnostics for new and transitioning students, including those entering pre-K and kindergarten. So this was a large conversation last week. We talked a lot about assessments, appropriate screening processes, and diagnostic tools. This really, going back to what Senator, not Senator Lockman, but Representative Williams said,
yes.
This really speaks to the focus and importance on planning for assessment that is really student-based and gives our teachers the most information possible to help our students accelerate their learning. And that's really sort of the consensus this group has sort of galvanized around. Not to say that there isn't, a lot of sentiment about, state tests and things of that nature, but we do really want to focus the need for this type of assessment with our students. You can see.
Sorry, I just want to jump in. I also want to credit both Representative Williams and Ms. Schneider around thinking about the students that are transitioning that may not be in the same place that they started. And so if they're homeless or other situations, and you did a nice job, Mr. Giska, last week of explaining your process in districts of how you receive transitioning students that are maybe from out of state or out of country, but this is to speak to that. So we really appreciate you all raising that, as well as students that are entering new to pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, those are really important points to consider, and we have to, again, like I said last week, kind of shift our thinking around students as they come into our buildings if they weren't previously with us. So we added the language of monitoring ongoing student process.
Progress.
I'm sorry?
Progress.
What did I say?
Process.
Well, that would be the wrong word. And it's not in this case. Monitoring ongoing student progress, another key element that was added. F was added as well. Ensure every educator receives professional learning and feedback in support of their implementation of acceleration strategies. So we had some conversation last week. One came up several times about the importance of professional development and professional learning opportunities and feedback around instruction during this, this challenging year. Also, there was some talk around remediation and the shift to thinking in terms of acceleration as an important strategy for making sure students have access to grade level content. But we also make sure that teachers understand exactly what that means and what those strategies look like to promote acceleration in our classrooms, be they virtual or in person. So that was added to encapsulate that conversation. And then you'll see there was also an addition of number 2, implement robust virtual learning plans for students who are medically vulnerable. This again is from the shift over from health and wellness for those that should not attend school. If the child did have an IEP, reconvene the IEP team to determine the virtual learning or homebound instruction is appropriate. So that's representative of the shift coming over from health and wellness around students who are medically vulnerable. Take a second here. All right. So this is something I know that, again, the Office of Exceptional Children and the director at Department of Education was looking at some of these things. There was some conversation that Dr. Gant talked about today from her team and around this particular language with MTSS to just change the heading from instead of additional supports to instruction, assessment, or professional learning. This is instruction, which is much a part of it as any other piece. So the additional supports was stricken and the heading was just re-identified under instruction, assess, or it was reincorporated into the heading of instruction, assessment, and professional learning. There was some addition here, the procurement of any additional standards, aligned tools or materials to support differentiation and intervention. Some folks last week brought up the need to bring in additional tools and making sure that we have what we need in order to be successful when we differentiate and have intervention for students. Also, there was an addition under number 4, the language conduct an analysis of multiple data points after assessing students with disabilities and convene the IEP team to review each student's IEP and identify students' progress and or needs based on time away from services, including occupational, physical, and speech therapy while the schools were closed. This language was just cleaned up, some additions. This is something, again, that was brought to the forefront about the importance of focusing on making sure our students' IEPs were up to date, making sure there was adequate documentation in them and evidence for progress. So this is, again, being added as we look at instruction throughout the course of these different scenarios. Dr. Gant, anything else here in the outlined items added?
Yes, I would like to highlight once again that I shared in public comment section that this really actually came directly from, I believe it was Emily Klein in public comments who asked the question around the language for 4A. It was a 4A and B, and that's when we took another look at it and just kind of cleaned up the language to make it a little clearer. So while the information is not different, the goal was to make it a little cleaner than was in the information that we shared with you by email. So that's the only difference here.
Perfect.
And we have a hand here, Mr. Gistica.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Representative Williams. I've taken you off mute.
Thank you. Actually, my question, it was on the previous slide, but it's been noted a couple times throughout the presentation. Just maybe the transitioning students, if we could have like some type of definition, because like I received a text from someone who's, I guess, listening, and I had the same question, like, what does that mean? Does that mean homeless students? Does that mean students who are transitioning between 2 different school districts?
It means all of those.
Yeah, it does mean it was general to reach out to many of those scenarios, but we are noting it down. I don't know if we possibly want to add anything there around parentheses or something possible, like maybe some IE, something like that. Representative Williams, is that what you're thinking?
Yes,
Okay.
if you could. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. Good job.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. All right. So we can go ahead and move forward at this point. Again, the headings were added here: preparation for remote learning, communication. Sorry, did somebody have something? Never mind. That is all the changes in this particular area, was the addition of the headings. I really like the headings. Lots of credit going out to Cricket and Dr. Gant. I think the headings do a great job of encapsulating the key elements of our conversations over the last 5 weeks about things that need to be focused on intently by districts and schools and charters as we move forward in this work. So.
Yeah, that's Cricket. I want to give Cricket credit for that. Yeah. But it really does help to orient you to reading the document. So thank you for that.
I like how that came out. It was very well done. Let's go ahead, move forward. All right, so now we're switching over to a new spread scenario for minimal to moderate spread if in hybrid. Here are some final recommendations and the considerations and changes made for those. Again, the first heading is instruction and assessment. And you'll note the change and addition of curriculum-driven formative assessment. Again, just coming back to that theme that we tried to build throughout the document of focusing there in terms of assessment as opposed to anything of high stakes, you know, or things of that nature. So an additional note was put under C, adjust daily instructional time based on. Then we had some conversation about this last week as well. Just kind of looking at, you know, recommendations concerning developmentally appropriate screen time was the first thing that we talked about, because, you know, what a day at school looks like, you know, whether it's hybrid or if students are home and so on and so forth. We need to really put some thought into what that instructional time is going to look like, where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, you know, what the challenges are for students that are encountering those experiences. Another addition was a different delivery methods with some, an example, be it in-person, blended, or remote, not being equal. And I think that was an important thing to kind of just put there sort of in very clear language that when we are having school in person, when we are having school in a blended situation, or whether we are having school in a remote situation, delivery methods and instructional time and you know, developmentally appropriate screen time, those are going to differ under those different scenarios. And we really need districts and charters to think about that. Okay, what are we asking students to do in these different scenarios? How much time are we spending in each area to get the most benefit for our students without inadvertently creating obstacles? Under 2, we added the language of blended learning plan to provide FAPE for each student with a disability as outlined in their IEP, which was an important element. You'll note that 504s was added. This is something we talked about even earlier this evening under 3. And then 4 was added completely, which was to implement a robust virtual learning plan for students who are medically vulnerable and should not attend school per physician recommendation. This addition is from the transition over from the health and wellness that we had talked about previously. So some really important changes on this page. Certainly something that was important to me is really getting schools to think about, you know, what those different delivery methods are and how those are not equal. And I think the wording we have here puts it very clearly and allows for those conversations to happen in those contexts.
I was wondering, Cricket, if you could make sure that in number 2, FAPE, free and appropriate education, if that is defined somewhere else. If it's not, we need to make sure that that acronym is clearly defined.
I don't think it is, Monica, so we'll do that.
So if you'll note that, thank you.
Still improving. Good job, everybody.
And we do have a hand up on this side.
Yeah.
Representative Williams, I'm taking you off mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Number 4.
Yes.
Like, I feel like we should be addressing additional personnel for our school districts and our charters. Like, so who is going to implement this additional, if you have a child that is out of school because of medical issues, but that child's teacher is currently teaching another class of students, who is going to implement these virtual learning sessions?
So the medically fragile students, the vulnerable students that were initially identified under health and wellness were students that had an IEP, that had that teacher that was assigned. The staffing part of it has been discussed in the operations and services section. So we really didn't do lots with staffing in academics and equity. We mainly focused on what they need. And then the services and operations section really kind of focused on the staffing piece. And if there is additional funding that's needed, that's really the area that they focused on.
So when we all first met as a large group, I had requested through, and this isn't towards, you guys are doing a great job. So, and I appreciate all the work. I know it's challenging dealing with all of us and all our ideas, but, and I really do appreciate all that you're doing. You've done a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess for me though, when we all first met as a large group, I had asked if we would be updated on the other 2 working groups so we could have a better understanding of how this is all going to connect with each other.
Sure.
And so I have lots of questions about, are we doing, you know, and I don't want to keep asking so many questions or keep interrupting you guys, but are we going to be able to see before we approve all this, the other plans? So if we have other thoughts or questions, like, they will be answered. Like, do you have any idea how we're moving forward with this?
I do. Actually, that's the last slide.
Okay, then I will be
I'll share it now. I'm happy to share it now. It's not a problem.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so each group has every week posted exactly what they're working on. So really, we've been posting this every week since June as we make corrections and additions. And so each work group's final recommendations will be posted, but they won't be posted as a total package because we're making those recommendations to the secretary who will then create the guidance. So she's going to synthesize all of that. So while we really do want to be able to figure out the how part of it, she's really going to be tasked with pulling all of the recommendations from the work group together, reading all of that, and then developing the guidance document based on that. So our recommendations won't appear as the guidance. They will be a part of the guidance. They'll be a huge part of the guidance, but they won't be the guidance. So if there's conflicting pieces or things that have to be reconciled, that will be done in the policy, not the policy, but the guidance document that's provided to districts and charters.
Okay, so I'm gonna get a hold of the secretary then. Okay.
Yeah, our recommendations are going to be provided. We're going to continue to post our recommendations just as we have. And we're going to do it again once we clean it up after tonight. We'll post it again and we'll actually send it out to you all so you'll have that. But everybody's will be posted. So you'll have an opportunity to see the recommendations from each group. And we've been able to do that all along. That's always been posted. But the actual final document is going to go out, and I'll share a little more information about that at the end, but it's going to go out at the in a couple of weeks. So I'll share that with you.
So will we be sent the other 2 working group final drafts so we can review them? I appreciate that it's all posted, but I know with Senator Lockman and I and Senator Pettyjohn, it's been really challenging with all the virtual meetings. So I like to stay focused on what my job is, you know, with this working group. And I know that it's a fluid document, the other 2 working groups.
Absolutely.
So are we going to receive the final draft sent to us as well before it goes public, or how is that going to work?
It's already public, but I can go online and pull it for you and send it to you.
I don't know. I can pull it. If it's so they're done. Like yesterday was the operational, I believe, right?
Yesterday was health and wellness.
Yes, and then tomorrow's operational. So
So they had their meeting last week. They're not having one this week, but they're posting theirs as well. So everybody is posting theirs as we go along. They're all public, but I'll be happy to share that with you. I can send it to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Representative Williams. It's a good point you bring up, and there is, like you said, there's a lot of interconnectedness. So I understand wanting to see it and engage with it. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So moving for moderate spread under communication as a heading, the addition under B was support for students' social emotional needs. Again, this came up much last week, just making sure that this is prevalent in our recommendations, that when we talk about supporting families, support for their social emotional needs is a paramount need for all people engaging in this work. So that is included in here. As well as for giving meaningful feedback on a child's progress, and basically just making sure that our districts and charters and schools across the state have prepared to give meaningful feedback on the progress students are making throughout the course of the year. And of course, again, you can see with the addition of all modes necessary in the very top sentence there on 5 to encapsulate that. You'll notice that professional learning heading has been added, as we've talked about before throughout the model. So some small changes here, but an important, again, to refocus student social emotional needs when communicating and supporting our families. So I'll give a minute here.
We have a hand up.
Absolutely. Who do we have?
Dr. Lawson, I've taken you off mute.
Hi, Dr. Lawson.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. I just I wanted to first say thank you for incorporating so much of the feedback that we've provided. It's excellent. So I wanted to make sure we had left instruction before I made a comment. I thought it might be continued. If you could just bump back one slide. I do worry that under instruction and assessment, if we don't call out social emotional curriculum, that it would be lost here. And I know I'm like a broken record, but I keep going back to Maslow, and you have to feel safe first, and then you can get into the academic piece. So even if we just put in parentheses in front of curriculum driven, academic and or social emotional. So it's important that we reflect both. And I just think looking at this instructional part without calling that out, we just don't want to forget it.
Sure. I'd really like to pull, possibly, if it's okay with you, Dr. Lawson, the language that we have at the beginning that talks about the integration of SEL through instruction versus SEL by itself. I don't want teachers to feel like they need to do that in a silo. That really needs to be a part of instruction. So if we can,
to be honest, our champion teachers are going to be assessing it every day, right? Surely. Depending on how their students, are, whether they're through a virtual format or in person.
Absolutely. So we'll Cricket, if you can make note of that, let's see if we can pull that language from our initial slides.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to include it there. Thank you, Dr. Lawson.
I'm not sure were we in the last, are we on this one?
I think we're on to this one. The other one with just some heading changes and one smaller change. Here we have the monitor and assess heading that was added. And you'll notice that we have here the language to begin 7 with monitor and assess the following for all students in a blended learning environment. So just we wanted to make sure that we talked about every student who is engaged in this blending learning environment, the need to monitor and assess things like access and materials, attendance, student access to materials each day, student completion of work each day, grading and credits post-secondary. So we sort of put it all under this umbrella of monitor and assess, and then just use that language to begin that list of A through D there. So an important thing as well. Great feedback last week, and was put together in a masterful way. Does anybody have any thoughts around this, or are you ready to go forward? It's pretty directly from what was brought to us last week. Okay. When the school buildings reopen under the minimal to moderate spread scenario, these will be our final recommendations.
And I want to bring to your attention that these are exactly the same as when buildings open in minimal spread. So this will all look very familiar. So if there's any changes that we've made, in that first minimal reopen, they'll be made here as well.
Correct. So I'm not going to go through the changes that are written out in red since we've already gone through them. But I will give you a minute to look through this. And if you have any thoughts in relation to where it sits as far as minimal to moderate spread, feel free to jump in. And if not, we will carry on.
No hands.
Okay, let's move on. And again, this language has been reviewed. Same situation here. All right, let's move to the next slide. Same headings that were added previously and we discussed or reviewed. Okay. All right, so that moves us to our last set of final recommendations, the significant spread scenario where buildings would be closed. It would be a full remote scenario. So let's go ahead and jump and take a look at some of those recommendations and any feedback that was incorporated from last week's session.
Again, this will be very similar to when we're in hybrid. So the difference in this and hybrid will be blended learning versus remote learning. And so any changes that we make to hybrid that you have identified will make those changes here as well.
Correct. So we're not going to go ahead and reevaluate or reread all of these red additions and changes as they had been previously touched upon in the previous scenario under hybrid. But we do want to review them as a group right now. If anybody has any thoughts or anything they need to share, we can do that.
We don't have any hands, Mr. Kiska.
All right, Kevin, move on. Same story here. Let's go ahead and move forward, Kevin.
We do have a hand up. Ms. Castellanos, I'm taking you off mute.
Yeah, Ms. Castellanos, what did you think?
Well, if school buildings are closed, like Dr. Gant said, a lot of it talks about blended and hybrid, and so this is a very different setting. So I'm wondering, if it should be specifically in each of the recommendations. When you talk about attendance, student access of materials, and completion of work each day, that's a very different setting in school buildings are closed, assessment of something like that, like attendance, and even numbers. Well, we're not number 7. It says monitor and assess the following students in a blended learning environment. But these last 2 pages are all about the schools being closed.
Are you suggesting, Ms. Castellanos, that it would say in a remote learning environment?
Yes.
That's what it's supposed to say. That was my error.
That's an oversight. Yep.
It over.
You're right. I was thinking that's what you meant, and you're right. That would just be an oversight. Dr. Gant did point that out when we started talking about this last scenario, but again, it was just not changed on that slide. So thank you for bringing that forward, Ms. Castellanos.
Well, Ms. Castellanos, do you see it? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, I know it's in 7. That's incorrect. It should say remote learning environment. Did you see it before that?
Well, I saw it as a copy of the hybrid, and I didn't see anything that made this section different than the hybrid. So I was kind of looking through, like, the first one, yes, activating the remote learning. It just, to me, it looked like a copy. I didn't see anything when I was looking through it that was in, if the school buildings are closed, there's a lot of processes that are going to be different. So I was trying to look for, in a remote environment, the attendance, for example, in a remote environment, and those kinds of things I think would be different.
Yes.
We're not going to do the hows, the district's going to do that, but it probably should reflect, there needs to be extra consideration or extra accountability for some parts of this instruction and assessment, and a lot of flexibility given the fact that it'll have to be delivered remotely.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have another hand. Representative Williams, I'm taking you off mute.
Sorry, my hand should not be up. I apologize.
No worries.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Ms. Castellanos, that's great.
No additional hands.
No additional hands. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. Thank you, Ms. Castellanos. That's something that we will duly note and follow up with.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gant, but I want to appreciate you all the thoughtful, analysis and effort you put into this endeavor. And I think we've got some great recommendations that go beyond even the work of that we need to do with COVID, but really just really address equity issues in our schools, and hopefully will start us down a good path. From this unfortunate situation, might some good come. So thanks everybody. Dr. Gant.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Giska. Our final charge is to submit our recommendations to the Secretary of Education. So this is sort of what I was speaking about a little earlier. The final recommendations will not be posted as a full report. Instead, each working group's document will be posted separately, as has been done over the past month. We will make final edits based on tonight's discussion and then forward the final recommendations to the Secretary of Education for her review. These recommendations will then be used to support the development of Delaware's reopening schools guidance to be released the week of July 13th. So that gives her time to pull all of the working group documents together and then to be able to create that guidance. We've been part of a pivotal time in the delivery of education, and we have engaged in work steeped in equity through educational access and opportunity. We remain committed to Delaware's instructional vision that every student across the state of Delaware leaves school ready for success in college, career, and life. On behalf of our team, my amazing co-chair, Ashley Giska, our incredible technology host, Kevin Lamb, our awesome Opportunities Labs partner, Cricket Hines, and just the incomparable academic support team admin, Gidget Milner. We thank you for all of your time and dedication to the Academics and Equity Working Group. I don't know if Ashley, if you have anything else that you'd like to say or anything that anyone from the team would like to say before we close out our meeting for this evening.
No, thank you, Dr. Gant. I've already said my thank yous, and I've already talked about how wonderful everyone was in this process. I've already said how much work and effort has gone into really crafting this recommendations by Dr. Gant and Cricket and incorporating all of your wonderful ideas. So it was obviously a pleasure to be part of this, and I'm excited at this point forward to see where this goes. Now the districts and schools that have already engaged in this, but we're going to continue forward and build an experience for kids, just like we all have always done, and we're going to make it better, and we're going to make it more equitable. And I can't wait to see what the brilliant people around the state of Delaware come up with, and it will be from the seeds you guys helped to sow here in this process. So I appreciate everything you've done, and I look forward to the innovation to come. Thanks all.
And I think we have a couple folks who want to make statements here at the end. Ms. Castellanos, take you off mute.
Yes, I just wanted to thank everybody in the public for their comments. It was very helpful each week to be able to read through comments from all different backgrounds from all across the state and kind of take those into consideration as we prepared our recommendations and our document. So I just wanted to make sure that we thank the public for their input, their advice, their guidance. That was very valuable as a part of this process.
I really appreciate you saying that. That was my last phrase. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking that home for us.
All right, and we have another hand from Ms. Thomas. You're off mute.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of my fellow committee members, my co-chairs. As a student that wants to pursue a career in working with children, it's been truly inspirational to just be in here with all of you. I feel as a student, I feel safe in the educational system, that I'm going to be taken care of. And that means so much to not only me, but my peers as well. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, and thank you for inviting me on this. It was an amazing opportunity.
Well, you have been amazing, and we really, really could not have done this without you. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
There are no additional hands at this time.
All righty. Well, everyone take care. Be well. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate working with you. We look forward to our work together in the future. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all
Thanks
so
for
much.
leadership.
Everyone.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.